Hello.
My bad, bro. It's 906.
906
Yeah.
divided by.
I divided by 10. What? No. What?
It's
Bro, what do you
4
mean?
person?
For IT, it's 4 person. But for like general people, most people either do it on their own or like 2 3 people.
Tick, boom.
There's a lot of people.
Oh, it's like.
Yeah, on the TPS time. TPS, you know, a lot of people. It's up there. It's getting up there.
That's it. We're
They
ready
have a
whenever.
higher rating than before.
You test the sound? Yep, I got it. All right. Are we ready for the meeting today? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. We do not have mics, so I'm gonna use my big boy voice this time. All right. Welcome to RITSEC. We got a cool presentation, the final education topic, and then elections and slide roulette and graduation. So let's get into it. Make sure you guys join the Discord if you have not. Yeah, I think we're all in the Discord. All right. Did I skip something? No. All right. Make sure you guys sign in. The sign in is dropped. Check for pizza. We're going to be checking the sign ins for pizza today. All right. Everyone know how to do that? All right, cool. Make sure you guys check the calendar as well. See whatever events and activities we have coming up for the rest of the semester. Also, join our mailing list as well to receive any emails and updates about what's going on as well. All right, now clap it up for the sponsors, guys. Clap it up for the sponsors. Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys. Make sure you follow our social media. Check us out on the YouTube stream if you want to be virtual. Also, check out our LinkedIn and Instagram as well. All right. Cool. Let's get into announcements. So, we have RITSEC elections nomination. Election nominations. The form closes on the 31st at 8. So, we have a few days left. All the positions are listed right there. And yeah, if you are nominated, you should be receiving a DM and from Dan, and he'll give you the information whether to confirm or deny your nomination. Elections will be held next meeting and the meeting after it, right here during the general meeting as well. So same time, same place, next Friday. All right, make sure you guys sign up for Slide Roulette, a little fun thing we do at the end of the semester. If you guys want to make a slideshow and have someone else present it, let's make sure it's somewhat appropriate. We will be reviewing it, but it'll be a lot of fun. Make sure you guys sign up and add to it. Yeah. We also have WESIS elections. The nomination period ends on April 3rd. The QR code is all the information about what positions you can run for. And elections are held on April 6th in this room from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. All right. We also have the RITSEC CTF today. Who's competing? Let's go. Clap it up. Big competition today. April 3rd to April 5th. After the general meeting to April 5th at 5 p.m. Reach out to Manav, whoever that is. Free food is also happening at 6 p.m. Or no, that was yesterday.
Also,
Yeah.
wasn't March 31st like 3 days ago? Nominations are not open. Yeah.
All right. Nominations are not open anymore, guys. I'm a little bit behind. All right. But we have some cool prizes. So if you guys are still interested, okay, I'm not gonna read off all the prizes. All right. And now we have CTF Basics by Manav.
That's okay. Yeah.
I think this is for the
Okay. Well, I'll be right here. Let's bring this down a little, shall we?
Yeah.
Hello. What's up, gamers? I'm Manav. Thank you for coming. We'll talk about CTF basics. I believe it's customary for me to introduce myself. So, I'm Manav. I'm a third year CS and math double major here at RIT. I'm the contagion lead and also the CTF competition architect for RITSEC. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Go Rangers, Bills, and Guards.
Woo!
And this is me if you'd like to make sure. Okay. Cool stuff. So what I'm going to be talking about today, let's talk about RITSEC CTF 2026, right? Why would we talk about that? It's today. It's today. Okay. Then I'll introduce you to the types of challenges that you might see in a traditional CTF. And then we're going to do deep dive introductions into my 3 favorite types: reversing, forensics, and cryptography. Okay? Everybody excited? We're all excited. You guys are excited. Come on. Yeah. Okay. RITSEC CTF 2026 starts today at 5 p.m. What does that mean? That means you need to be locked in. April 3rd, today at 5 p.m. If you're competing with RIT teams, you can have teams of up to 4 for the cool prizes that we had listed earlier. If this is very important, if your team consists of all RIT members, make sure that you're registered in the RIT Team Tracker Google form as well as CTFD. Otherwise, you'll be relegated to the open bracket, and you're going to have to make a ticket once you fill out the form later. And that's a lot of work that nobody really wants to do, right? This bracket locks at noon on Sunday, so up until then, you can register or change your team, make modifications, whatever you want to do, up until noon on Sunday, April 5th, because that's 5 hours before the competition ends. But then after that point, it's locked. Okay. We're all excited, right? Who'd you say who's participating in RITSEC CTF? Oh my gosh, that's like a majority. That's a majority of the room, right? That's a majority. Come on, that's good numbers. Okay, folks. Let's talk about some challenge types that you might encounter. So the type of CTFs that you see most often are Jeopardy style CTFs, right? So there's like a few different types. The main one is Jeopardy. So a Jeopardy style CTF, you have a whole grid, a bunch of different categories, and a bunch of challenges in each category, right? You hack something, you do something, you get a flag, you submit it to that challenge, and you get points. Okay? So some of the most common types, let's start with pwn, right? That's your basic low-level binary exploitation, hacking an application, executables, remotes, all that sort of stuff, right? Next, you have web exploits. That's inspecting, injections, things like that. It's where you're hacking a website, you're trying to gain access, or you're trying to break it, or reveal some information that you shouldn't know in the website. Next, you have reversing, pretty much just short for reverse engineering, right? That's where you can reverse applications and binaries. Maybe you have a certain output that you'd like to get to, and you have to figure out what inputs you have to give the application to get that output. That's an example of reversing, right? Then you have crypto, short for cryptography. That's a lot of math involved in that, right? So you're breaking codes, breaking crypto systems, ciphers. You're doing lots of, so some of it is like pretty high level math, like group theory, number theory, all that sort of stuff. Next, we have forensics. This is where the flag isn't necessarily like encrypted or encoded anywhere, but it's hidden, and you have to uncover it, right? OSINT, we know what OSINT stands for. Can somebody tell me what OSINT stands for, please?
Open source intelligence.
Open source intelligence. I believe you had a very interesting presentation on that last week from Odessa about how we can use OSINT to get some cool information. Basically just like cyber stalking, right? So that can be a challenge. So you have to like uncover some sort of information. And then you have the miscellaneous category, which is everything else. Maybe you have a challenge that fits into multiple categories, or maybe it doesn't fit cleanly into any of them. For example, you have things like machine learning challenges or blockchain challenges are becoming more popular these days. All of those you might find in miscellaneous. Cool? Okay, so these are the 3, reversing, cryptography, and forensics, that we're going to be taking a closer look at, and I'll introduce you to some of the basic techniques to solve some easy challenges in these categories. Cool? Okay, first, let's begin with an introduction to reversing. What is reversing? It's a good place to start, right? Reversing is where you analyze software or hardware to determine its design, functionality, and implementation, right? So a lot of times when you have an application, basically all you have is a black box. You see what it wants you to see, you give it what it wants you to give it, but you don't know what's going on under the hood. So reversing is sort of revealing that information, what is going on under the hood. So in CTF challenges, in the reversing category, you'll be expected to find vulnerabilities in programs and use the software logic to solve problems or bypass protections like passwords and recover hidden information about it, right? So I would categorize reverse engineering challenges into two very broad categories, an easier and a harder one. So the first one is source code reversing. That's where you're given source code that has some functionality. They're usually password checkers, right? The source code would be like if I gave you the lines of Python that I wrote to create this application, for example, right? This is easier because you have everything in front of you. There's no black box functionality at all, right? When you have the source code, you can see exactly what's going on. So it's a little easier. Binary reversing is harder. This is where you have a compiled program, like a binary or an executable, and you have to decompile it, which is by itself a difficult step. And you have to analyze its control flow, which is harder when it's not in easily digestible source code. All right. Okay, so here's a pretty basic example where we're operating over source code. This is just Python, right? So basically, we pass in some password as an input. Then what does that mean? If you're familiar with Python slices, what does that mean? We have colon -1. What does that do to the string? It reverses it, right? It just flips it. So we're checking if the input that we give it when flipped is equal to that. And if so, we print correct. Otherwise, we print wrong. Pretty basic, right? So we figured out how this worked. How do we reverse it, right? If you reversing something and then you reverse it again, you get back to the original, right? So we can do that here, and we end up with a flag. It's just RS and then whoa in braces. Cool. Okay, now this is we're getting a little more complicated with it, so we're just gonna step back into pseudocode for a second. So we have function 1 that operates over some text, and we add 1 to each letter. So for example, A becomes B, B becomes C, and Z, we can make it A, for example, right? Okay, and then for function 2, we add the position of each letter to each letter. For example, the first letter, you add 0 to it. You can keep it the same. The second letter, you add 1, so A becomes B. Third letter, you add 2, so A becomes C, so on and so forth, right? And then again, we have a pretty simple main function. We take input as our password, and we perform function 1 and then function 2 on password. And if that equals what our check string is, then we can print win. Otherwise, it fails, right? So how do we write inverses for these functions? These are pretty basic, right? These are what we call linear transformations because you're just multiplying or adding, right? In this case, it's just adding, but a linear transformation can be multiplication too, right? So function 1, the inverse of function 1, I posit to you, is subtract 1 from each letter. Makes sense, right? Pretty simple. Function 2, again, pretty simple. You subtract the position of each letter from each letter. So if we do these, now recall that once we have the inverses, these functions were applied to PWD in the order of you do function 1 and then function 2. So when we reverse it, we have to reverse function 2 first and then function 1. Right? So basically, these are the inverses where we put underscores, and you'll see that we do it in the opposite order now to unravel it from the outside in. Make sense? Okay, so that's pretty basic source code examples. Now let's talk about how the interpreting and compiling process works. So Python, if you're familiar, if you're a CS major, you'll have to take some classes that tell you about this, is an interpreted language, which has some big differences, but in our cases, these are some minor differences from a compiled language, right? So the Python source code passes through a massive black box called an interpreter. The interpreter compiles it into bytecode and then merges all the library modules into it using a virtual machine and then provides running code. So Python works, an interpreted language works a little bit differently from a compiled one. Okay, so and then we can zoom in to the black box of the compiler that we have here. It takes high-level language. This is the readable language. For example, C equals A plus B. It translates it into assembly operation opcodes, right? You have loading A, you have to add B to it, and then store it in the variable C, and then, oh, sorry, those aren't opcodes. Opcodes are machine language, right? And you get machine languages, and then this is totally human unreadable. This is basically the ones and zeros that a computer is going to read to run your code, right? In practice, this is what that looks like, right? So you have source code, it pre-processes it, assembles, then piles into object, and then executable code. We don't have to go too in depth into this. This is just like a general overview of what a compiler does. Okay, so what is assembly versus machine code, right? This is code that is used for direct execution by the CPU, and it has a one-to-one relation with opcodes, right? So instructions are the text and assembly code. For example, you have like load, store, you can add to a register, load a register, whatever, right? And opcodes are the specific numbers in machine code that tell a CPU what to do. So each instruction corresponds to an opcode and vice versa. So if you have, 10 instructions, you'll have 10 opcodes. So disassembling into assembly code is easy since opcodes are one-to-one with instructions. So any disassembler will pretty much tell you the exact same thing when you disassemble, right? You just take the opcodes and then translate back into assembly. It's one-to-one, very easy. Now, high-level languages are compiled into assembly, but then assembly is compiled into machine code. So compilers, when they compile things, have a lot of optimizations and shortcuts. So it's not really possible to undo. So that makes the compilation more or less a one-way process. There exist tools, for example, Ghidra, developed by the National Security Agency, that can do this pretty well, but it does make some mistakes and assumptions. So if you run it through Ghidra versus, for example, a different tool like Binary Ninja or IdaPro, something like that, you might get slightly varying results. So it's not deterministic. What you have to do in your analysis is reverse engineer. Once you have reverse engineered machine code into readable code, now you can perform your analysis on it and figure out what's going on with it. Okay, that was my introduction to reversing for you. Now let's jump into forensics, right? What is forensics? Always a good place to start. So in the real world, forensics is recovering, analyzing, and presenting on data left in a computer. We're talking about computer forensics here, not like CSI crime lab forensics, right? A little different. So that's really what it's like in the real world. But in CTFs, what this amounts to is analyzing and processing hidden data out of static files. So it's more or less finding a needle in a haystack. This could be analyzing things like images or memory dumps, packet captures, archive files, things like that. And some of these are easier to analyze than others. So it depends on the size and the type of the file that determine how easy or hard it is to find something that's hidden. Okay, so file formats. These are very important, and these magic bytes or file signatures may sometimes be your best friend, right? So these 4 bytes, in some cases for a PNG, it's 4 bytes at the beginning of the image. They're used to identify and verify the contents or the type of file. Usually they're found at the beginning of a file. Like in the case of a PNG, you see in the ASCII half of the hex editor, it's some non-printable character PNG is the magic bytes for it, right? So there's a helpful tool, filesig.search.org, that has all the file signatures. Occasionally in a challenge, you might need to repair a file using its signature. If it's been corrupted, you randomize some of the bytes of data, and that makes it not readable anymore. So you might need to repair a file, which can be difficult depending on the level of damage done to it. So a few tools for initial analysis of file is file, that tells you some information about the type of the file. You can run strings, that looks for any strings that are any strings of readable text that are inside the bytes of the file. So for example, if I were to do it on here, you would at least be able to see PNG, IHDR, which is another section of data in a PNG file. You see like file, things like that. So you'd be able to see all of those strings in there. So at a basic level, you might have a challenge that just has the flag hidden in the bytes here. So if you run strings on it, it'll reveal the flag in the string. Okay, and then a hex editor, just to read the bytes. That's useful for any file when you need to read the bytes. Okay. File carving. This is where they get a little tricky with it, right? Files can be hidden inside of other files. So for example, zip files, you expect it to have a bunch of content compressed into it. When you reinflate the zip file, you get all the files back that were compressed, right? But they can have other hidden files besides just what you compressed into it, right? An example is that images can contain other images. The main really important tool to do this when you're looking for file carving and things like that is binwalk. So this is an example of an image that I binwalked here. And you can see that at chunk 0, byte number 0, it recognizes the PNG header and it says, oh, this must be a PNG image. But then at byte number 41, it sees that there's some other data here that doesn't follow the PNG format. It looks like zlib compressed data, right? So you can see that if you start with an image, then you can modify the bytes to have the header of a different file type, and then just basically copy and paste that file into the bytes of the other file. Then you can include it that way. And you can use binwalk to reveal this information and sort of carve them out and see exactly what files are there. There's also scalpel, but binwalk is number 1. Okay, metadata is data that describes data. So metadata is pretty common if you have like a JPG or like a JPEG file. And metadata holds a lot of details about a file, like when it was created, when it was modified, maybe the author of the file. Some images might even have like geolocation information, like where it was taken. It might be what camera took the picture, all that sort of stuff that you might not originally realize comes with shipped with the picture that you took with your camera. But all of that data can be in there. So first of all, be careful of that if you're dealing with files and things like that. But also, in the case of a CTF, you can use tools like EXIF tool that shows you the metadata of a JPEG. So, for example, this one right here, I just ran some random image through it. It tells me exactly when the file was modified, when was the last time I accessed the file, when the file was changed, what the permissions of the file are, and things like that, right? So in a very simple scenario, you might just have the flag hidden in one of the metadata fields. But otherwise, you can still get some really good information from here that might not be revealed otherwise. Okay. Network forensics. This is where things get a little bit tricky. So this is just the regular forensics that we just talked about, but instead you're analyzing network traffic. Frowny face because that's hard, right? So you're examining protocols like TCP or UDP, or you might have like a packet capture that has information about devices connected to it, or IoT protocols, things like that. So some common challenge types in network forensics would be things like file carving, protocol analysis, identifying manipulated packets, and then you have to fix them to complete the data flow, extracting encoded traffic data, like if you're sending some sort of encrypted data over TCP, for example, that would be something that you would want to reveal through a packet capture. Right? So at a very high level, how all this networking stuff works is that a computer talks on a network and it sends data back and forth in small packages that are called packets. So each packet contains basic info about where it's going, where it come from, where it came from, how to read it, and obviously the actual data is carrying itself. So, I mean, I'm sure you can recognize all of those first few things are the metadata that the packet carries, right? So if you're familiar with tools like Wireshark and things like that, sometimes you can like capture the packets that are going between two different hosts, for example, right? And all of those packets, they carry some information that you can analyze. Sometimes that has hidden secrets in there that you would want to reveal. Okay, right. So Wireshark, it's a packet analyzer tool. It's free and open source. There used to be an an online version called, I think it was CloudShark. I don't know if it's still around, but yeah. So it's used to capture packets and view captured packets. Usually, you're using Wireshark to view captured packets like this. For example, you can see like all the protocols, DNS, TCP, HTTP, all those kinds of things. So that basically show you traffic flow, all that sort of stuff. Um, it has some super helpful features like packet filtering. You can filter out maybe if you just want a certain protocol, maybe a certain source IP, certain destination IP. Maybe you're filtering for a specific piece of text that's in the information string, all that sort of stuff. It also lets you follow certain conversations. Like I'm guessing most of you are cybersecurity majors, so things like SYNAC and things like that, right? You can follow the path, even though that might be split across several packets that have time and other packets in between them. It lets you follow that conversation because it's essentially it's just one connected thing, right? If there's files embedded in any of these packets, Wireshark will let you pull them out, and you can calculate statistics like what's the most common source or most common destination, or even like what are the most common source destination pairs. That might reveal some interesting information about the type of traffic that you see. Okay, OS forensics, OS, operating system forensics, right? What this entails is analyzing file systems and memory dumps from different operating systems to recover artifacts. So what does this entail? You might be given a memory dump or a disk image or registry hive files. We're talking about Windows, right? So memory forensics versus disk forensics, they're similar, but there's some like main differences, right? So memory, you would have you're given like some files, some file dump, some archive. Disk forensics, you have an image of a disk or like some volumes that you have to analyze through. So there's some differences. These I think might even be harder than doing network forensics is OS forensics. Again, if you have like a really big image, maybe you have an image of an entire operating a copy of someone's Windows, for example. That's massive, right? So you have to find a needle in a haystack. So it's important to look for clues, know what you're looking for. Okay. Uh, right, memory forensics. So we'll talk about this. A memory dump is basically a snapshot of a computer's RAM at any given time, which carries a lot of information, but there's still a lot of information missing because lots of information only exists at runtime. So it wouldn't be found in the computer's RAM when it's not in use, right? So this is very popular for incident response scenarios because attackers sometimes, in many cases, attackers don't like touching the disk, right? So the only tool that I am really familiar with for memory analysis is volatility. That's like the main one. So you can use volatility to analyze networks or analyze memory dumps, things like that. Disk forensics. So I guess we're going deeper into the difference, right? So a disk image is a snapshot of a computer's file system at a point in time. So we're not just taking a look at the computer's memory, we're getting the entire file system. Traditionally, these are bit for bit copies of all the data on the disk, including data that's unallocated. So there might be like a lot of garbage that you have to tune out. Obviously, there's a lot of different file systems. Every major operating system has made their own at this point, right? So all of these, yeah. So a common pretty basic problem that you encounter is like what happens when a file is deleted, right? Does that data just like get nuked? No, that data might still be there. It just doesn't have anything pointing to it until it's overwritten, right? So I could delete a file, take a snapshot of my computer's file system, hand it to you, and if I've done nothing else to it, then you should be able to recover that file that I deleted, right? So yeah. The only tool that I really know for disk forensics is autopsy. I think that's the main one in there too, right? You can look at a snapshot of a disk, analyze it, pick out information, take snapshots of the file system, etc. Okay, steganography. This might be the most. Ariana's getting excited. No. Steganography might be like the most common thing that you'll encounter in forensics at more of the beginner level challenges, right? So steganography means you conceal a message within another message or physical object. So a common example of this is with pictures, images, right? So RGB data is stored as bytes, as everything is, right? So when you have a byte, you have 8 bits, right? And of those 8 bits, one of them corresponds to a value that's 2 to the 0 power, right? So it's just changing the RGB values by 1. So if we hijack that least significant bit and just flip it for between a 1 and a 0, then we can hide information in that least significant bit. And because we're only changing each of the RGB values by at most 1, that's not going to make a visual difference at all. In fact, even if you like analyze it visually with like a color picker or something like that, it might not even pick up on that difference, right? So we can include data that way without it being visually apparent. So obviously there's lots of tools for you to do this, like Steg Online or OpenStego, StegHide, ZSteg. GIMP is just, you can like analyze pixel by pixel because you can like kind of zoom in, look at the pixels, stuff like that. PNG tools, etc. Right? Steganography, very common at a basic level. Okay, so that was all I have for you about forensics. Now we can talk about my personal favorite, cryptography. Are you guys excited to learn about cryptography? Woo! Yes. Okay, thanks guys. What is cryptography? Always a good place to start, right? Cryptography is where we encode or hide information so that only the intended recipient can use it. Okay. There's a pretty well-defined divide here between classical and modern cryptography. Classical cryptography is what we think of when we think of like Caesar ciphers, or way back in those days, right? So classical cryptography involves a lot of manual work and humans doing these computations and encodings and things like that. Versus these days we have modern cryptography, which focuses more on mathematical theory and computer science. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of math involved in high-level cryptography, especially these days. You can't do any cryptography these days without having at least a basic understanding of group theory and things like that. Okay, so the primary goal in a crypto system is that even if I, as an attacker, has full information about the system, like if I had a user manual, this is how you encrypt things, this is how you decrypt things, I still should not be able to break the code. In other words, that means that security should never rely on knowledge of how the system works. It shouldn't be like, oh, I created a crypto system in my head. Theoretically, it's not very secure, but only I know how it works, so it's secure. It's not, I promise. Okay? So let's start with a few basic definitions, just so we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about here. Plain text is the English message you're trying to send. For example, come to the bridge at midnight. There you go. Ciphertext is what that message looks like when it's encoded, so not human readable theoretically. Okay? A cipher is an algorithm that we use to turn plain text into ciphertext. We have keys, which are not always secret, but sometimes they're secret pieces of information that we use to encode. And we define the key space as all the possible keys for a particular cipher. And we'll talk more about how key spaces work in a second. Right? Let's talk about very simple. We'll talk about simple ciphers in classical cryptography. Let's start with a Caesar cipher. Raise your hand if you're familiar with a Caesar cipher. That's pretty much everybody, right? So let's think about this. That's where you have every letter that's shifted by an equal amount. Remember our function from forensics where you add 1 to every letter? That's an example of a Caesar cipher, right? Where the key is 1 because you're shifting everything by 1. Here we have an example of a shift of 3, right? So A goes to D, B goes to E, so on and so forth, right? Here I give you an example where the plain text is contagion and the shift is 5. This is the resulting ciphertext. By the way, convention is that plain text we represent in lowercase letters, ciphertext we represent in uppercase letters. That's just conventionally how we do it. Okay, What is the key space of the Caesar cipher? Can somebody tell me at least what the size of the key space of a Caesar cipher is? 26. Exactly right. Technically we can say 25 because, a shift of 26 is basically A goes all the way around back to A. So it's like everything is modulo 26, right? But the key space is 25. Does that make it secure? Room at large, does that make it secure? No, it doesn't, right? Because if there's 25 options, I can just try all 25 options. Even without a computer, I could do that by hand. I could try all 25 options. Not secure at all. Especially for a computer, does that in like 20 milliseconds, right? Not a good idea. Now let's talk about a substitution cipher, which is just a more general case of a Caesar cipher. Or in particular, we can say that a Caesar cipher is a specific case of a substitution cipher. So this is where we replace the plaintext alphabet with any constant ciphertext alphabet, right? So in this example that I've given you here, A always is encrypted to Y, B goes to F, C goes to E, so on and so forth down the line. So we can encode the word contagion as that, right? And you can see, you can convince yourself that it works, match up the C with the E, the O with the O with the O, and so on and so forth. Okay. Can somebody tell me what is the size of the key space of a substitution cipher? Any ideas? What's that? 26 squared, not quite. Remember that the key is the key that we're using here is basically just the ciphertext alphabet. You have an idea? 26 factorial, that's exactly right. Because we're basically, the key that we're constructing is the ciphertext alphabet. So for the letter that A encrypts to, we have 26 options. But the letter that B encrypts to, now that we've used one letter, so we only have 25 options. So on and so forth down the line, 26 times 25, all the way down. That gives us 26 factorial. Is that secure? I mean, kind of, right? Not too much, because 26 factorial is, that's pretty small, but it's about 4 times 10 to the 26th, right? That's high. Eventually, a computer can get through all of those possibilities, right? But does that make it secure? No, it doesn't make it secure, right? We can think about this, right? If you have a long enough message, you can do, what's the most common letter in the English language? E, right? So that's an example of something we can look for, right? There's all sorts of statistics that we can perform on this that make a substitution cipher really bad also. So don't use this in your crypto systems. Okay, a Vigenère cipher is a polyalphabetic cipher. So essentially we have multiple substitution alphabets instead of just one. So this is where each plaintext letter is encrypted with a shift that is determined by the corresponding letter of the keyword. There's a typo there. So for example, we have the plaintext welcome to the jungle, and our key is the word contagion, right? Basically what we do, we line up the W and the C, right? W plus C gives you Y. E plus O gives you S. L plus N gives you Y again, so on and so forth, right? So basically you repeat the key over the length of the plaintext and you add them all up to get a ciphertext. What is the key space of a Vigenère cipher? Anybody has an idea? Like, what is the size of the key space of a Vigenère cipher? Any ideas? I'll give you a little hint. There's no limit on the size of the key, right? My key can be 1,000,000 letters long, or it could be 3 letters long, right? Does that give you an idea? So what might the size be of the key space? Ideas? It's however long we make the word is the size of the key, right? And we can make the key as large as we want it. So in theory, the size of the key space of a Vigenère cipher is infinite, right? Because I could give you a key that's 1,000,000 letters long, right? But in practice, the key for the Vigenère cipher should be something memorable, right? For example, the word contagion, not something like the full text of War and Peace, right? That's not a very helpful key. But can we consider the example where I make the key just a long string of random letters, right? That's infinitely secure as long as I have the key, because how are you going to guess what those letters are, right? You basically can't if it's long enough. But that is pretty much equivalent to a one-time pad that we'll take a look at later. So in theory, it is unbreakable, but that's not really a Vigenère cipher at that point. Okay. Another thing here, you see that W was encoded with the C, and the T in the is also encoded with the C in contagion. So we can use some frequency analysis techniques to determine what the length of the keyword is. And at that point, we have W's encoded with the same letter as the T in the. So at that point, we can combine the W and the T. If there's more that were encoded by that same C, we mash them all together. And at this point, they were all encoded by the same letter. So we basically just need to solve a Caesar cipher, right? And we can use our frequency analysis techniques. For example, like we know that E is the most common letter. We can use those to figure out what that might have been. So still not super secure. There's many techniques that we can use here. Okay, now let's talk about modern cryptography a little bit. So what is the problem here? We need to communicate messages securely on an insecure channel. We have, plenty of insecure channels these days. And when we're communicating on an insecure channel, we can assume that somebody is listening. So in the case, we have Alice and Bob trying to communicate with each other. Eve is listening. How do we solve this problem? We'll talk about that. So we can split encryption into two main types in modern cryptography. We have symmetric or asymmetric key encryption. Some main differences. In symmetric encryption, you use the same key for encryption and decryption. Asymmetric key encryption, we have different keys for encryption and decryption. Symmetric encryption, since we have the same key for encryption and decryption, that means we need to have some secure way of sharing the key. Whereas in asymmetric key encryption, this can be used over insecure channels, since the only thing we really need to send back and forth is the key for encryption, right? And we don't mind if people are encrypting things as long as they can't decrypt our secret messages. So, symmetric key cryptography, most modern schemes rely on the bits and bytes of the data, whereas in asymmetric key encryption, we rely on number theory and math. So all of that makes symmetric key encryption faster and simpler, whereas asymmetric is slower and more complex, but in practice, more secure. So let's talk about XOR. We're all familiar with XOR, right? We use it with this little caret is bitwise XOR. So for example, we have some bit A, we XOR it with 0, we're always going to get A back. We can try this because there's only two possible bits, right? So 1 XOR 0 is 1. 0 XOR 0, 0. Again, if we XOR a bit with itself, we get 0. We can try this. 1 XOR 1 is 0. 0 XOR 0, 0. It's also, it doesn't matter the order that you XOR in, right? So A XOR B equals B XOR A. It's also associative, right? A XOR B XOR C, same thing as A XOR B XOR C. This will be helpful to us. So keep these properties in mind. Okay, let's do an example here. This is an example of a cipher we can call constant XOR. So we choose a single byte constant K as the key. Okay. In this case, we encrypt each plaintext byte P by taking the new ciphertext byte, we'll call it C, is P XOR K. All right, so we basically just XOR each byte with our key. So in this example, you have that's your plaintext byte. You basically just add it with the key. XOR is basically just bit addition, right? So you add those up, and that gives you the ciphertext. How might we decrypt this if we're given the ciphertext and the key? How can we recover the plaintext? Somebody? Yeah, exactly. It's the ciphertext XOR the key, right? And that's based on these properties that we have here. I'm running a little low on time, so I'm not going to go through exactly why this works, but we can use these properties to convince ourselves that that's why this works. So what is the key space of this? Or what is the size of the key space of a constant XOR cipher? So the key is 1 byte. How many possible bytes exist? Philip said 2. Huh? 2 to the 8th, right? Because for each bit position, you can have either a 0 or a 1. Is that secure? Room at large, is that secure? No. Remember, we have a single byte as our key here. Right, so the key space is 2 to the 8th. That's not secure at all, right? 2 to the 8th, that's, what was it, 256? That's easy. That's peanuts for a computer to crack, right? We can do that instantly. Not secure. Let's talk about the asymmetric key puzzle. This is what we're trying to solve here. So our goal is to exchange secrets without having shared keys. Shared keys means we need to find some private channel, and those haven't been invented yet, okay? Alice wants to send a message to Bob. Let's talk about it this way. Alice has a treasure chest that she would like Bob to receive, but she has to send it in the mail, and when she's sending it in the mail, anybody can take it. So how do we solve this problem? So Alice has an unlimited supply of her own lock with her own keys. So only she can lock and unlock those locks. Bob does the same. He has his own set of locks and keys, right? So Alice will lock the treasure chest with her lock, send it to Bob. Bob can't open Alice's lock, so he can't access the treasure. But instead, he puts his own lock on the treasure chest. So now it has 2 locks on it, one for Alice, one for Bob. He sends it back to Alice. Alice can only unlock her lock. She takes her lock off, so now the treasure chest only has Bob's lock on it. So if we send it back, now Bob has a treasure chest with his lock on it. He can open his own lock and access the treasure, right? So that's the general idea of Diffie-Hellman key exchange, right? And we can do this mathematically, right? So Alice has her secret number. In this case, we'll choose A equals 4. This corresponds to Alice's lock and key. And she sends Bob capital A, which corresponds to the treasure chest with her lock on it. That's basically G to the power A modulo P, right? Bob does the same, and basically we're doing locking and unlocking as exponentiation, right? And these are hard. This is a hard problem to solve because in practice these numbers are going to be massive, hundreds of bits, and exponentiation, modular exponentiation in particular, because we're taking 2 million to the power 2 million, but it's also modulo 5,000, right? That is a very, very, very difficult problem to invert. This is something we call the discrete logarithm problem. Sylvie can solve it, so Sylvie is going to be rich, right? But that's a difficult problem for computers to solve. They can spend a lot of time on it and a lot of computing power and still not get the result or the base and the exponent, right? So this is why we have some new quantum computing technologies is what we're researching now to be able to solve these kinds of problems, and that would make these kinds of key exchanges breakable. Please note, this is not an encryption method, it's only key sharing. There is, and this is a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, right? There's a type of encryption called El-Gamal that boils down to basically just Diffie-Hellman plus a one-time pad. Okay, that was the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Oh yeah, my microphones. That's the end of education. It's the social hour now. We'll be back at, honestly, it might be earlier, it might be 2 for research. We've got 4 research presentations today, so stick around for those. Those are pretty interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Pizza should be here soon. Jake? Pizza should be here soon. Okay, pizza should be here soon. Sweet.
We have no flagging for sure.
Oh yeah, 1 second.
Did you set it? It's just really good thing. And it's already on for Eden. That deal, I can't find what that.
There you go.
Yeah, no more. What? We just have to start the project. Wait, that always good. It's like, you gave me my picture, right? Yeah. I can't stop fucking winning.
It's amazing. I don't know. No, I was up there. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, you will not run back. Okay. Okay. What is that for? Are you talking which one are you talking about? Which is yeah, so like a theory. But yeah, if there's no order to it,
It's like, yeah, I got to, yeah. Like there's like stuff. This specific.
When you're right, you're right.
We have two finals.
What is What is
He
happening?
says, well, that he's like, okay, what are we doing the rest of the course since you're not like being tested? We're in the morning. For sure. He's for things. Which honestly, teach whatever you want.
Yeah, honestly, it can be the hardest. Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, I don't care. Hell yeah, let's go. Okay, I gotta make a call, but this is great. Thank you for bringing me. Huh?
That way, it's nothing. It's nothing. We don't find this fucking class. So like, oh, I paid my 50%. So I will final. We'll hold one. Okay, so like, you're basically going that class then? Well, I think we're like, so that's like, not the same. That's great. I can just see it's just. Woo! Yeah, yeah, fine. Anyone that didn't yet fill out their March cert, if you guys are approved, try to get this done today.
Does this work yet or it's gone? I know, but maybe Dan updated it, or maybe I don't know. Should I make an announcement?
I want to update this with me. It's only accessible from this laptop. Who did the fuck? Why is it 30?
Because we're starting at 1:30.
No, I know, but I didn't have it. Who the fuck did that?
You sure it
Wasn't like
reverting Adam Brock? Oh, you wouldn't do that anyways.
He doesn't know. He left immediately.
Okay, I'll make an announcement then.
Sure.
Hello, hello.
Oh yeah, mics don't work today, by the way.
Why not?
We don't fucking have these out. It's because the building
Wait,
wasn't.
wait, hold on. I want to go check on this.
Yeah, where it's getting from.
No one's gonna hear me.
They can hear you.
No, you won't. Aren't you supposed to have a visit the last general meeting?
I'm so sad. Dude, it's literally like
Are we ready to start?
17. Is the Zoom still up?
It's starting at 20.
Yeah, Zoom's still up. So you will need to join it soon though, so that it doesn't. I said you will need to join it soon though, so it doesn't like exit out. It exits out after 40 minutes of idle.
I don't need this.
But yeah, it was literally like. What did Melissa say? Melissa said that like
What is that, bro?
Oh, that's just
Bottom.
from earlier.
Oh my God.
Whoa! Holy moly! What the hell was that? Where's my neighbor now? We should be good now. So.
I need everyone in here.
All right.
Every single person. Hi, James. How's your fish fry? Okay. Why are you walking like that? Why are you walking like that? Dude, you mean you can't leave? You have to stay now that you're here. I'm gonna freaking shame you right now if you leave. Guys, Monov is leaving. I'll make sure to give a CTF shout out. Actually, I do have a CTF shout out. Yeah. I'm telling everyone to do it. Okay, bye. He's leaving research. Unacceptable. Okay, we good? Okay, hi guys. I guess there's no microphone in here or something. Hey! Hi. We're starting. Because I guess there's no mic today, so I'm just going to have to, like, yell. Yeah, welcome to research, everyone, though. Let's get into it. All right. I don't know why I kept this slide, because there's no more presentations this semester. This is the last general meeting, and then we'll have elections and slide roulette. So you can still do the blog if you want. You know, you can fill this out, talk to me, whatever. Again, all the usual. Sign in, join the Discord, check the calendar, join the mailing list, and follow our social medias. And of course, please clap it up for the sponsors. Thank you. Okay, some quick announcements. Slide roulette, guys. April 24th. I'm looking around this room. Every single one of you should be signing up. Thank you, Leah. Let's go. Get those numbers up, guys. We had pretty abysmal numbers last fall. Worst slide roulette numbers so far, so help me get the spring up. Please sign up to slide up. Yeah, slide up. If you don't know what slide roulette is, it's essentially you make a slide for somebody. It can be a specific person or just random, and then you'll get a random slide to present yourself, and it's kind of just like a fun activity where you'll present something goofy and you don't know what it is in advance. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to me. Please sign up, though. The winner will get their name on the Slidely Cup, entombed on the Slidely Cup forever. Also, WESIS elections, the nomination period is the 18th through April 3rd, which I think is today. So fill it out today if you want to nominate someone or yourself. I don't know how it compares to our elections. Probably pretty similar. And elections will happen April 6th. So that's pretty soon. Also, guys, RITSEC CTF is starting tonight and over the weekend. There was free food yesterday, but sign up or participate if you want. There's a bunch of prizes for first place, second, third, and fourth. If you want to do CTFs, participate, rep RITSEC. So into the cybersecurity news, last meeting edition, guys. No more news. I know that's really upsetting to some of you, but I'm just going to be talking about some different supply chain attacks kind of over the past 2 weeks. Yeah, but I say like past 2-3 weeks, some stuff with Axios and Team PCP targeting a bunch of different like services and stuff. So first up, Axios supply chain attack. So recently, this library, Axios, is an HTTP a JavaScript library, recently had a supply chain attack via a hijacked retainer. Essentially, the attackers targeted a package.json and just added an additional dependency. So instead of modifying the source code, they just updated it, added a new dependency which targets this malicious library. and that essentially acted as like it would install an OS agnostic rat, and I'm pretty sure it's just like a cred grabber, and the malware that was used is associated, maybe from the article that I read, associated with North Korea. The Microsoft's classification is Sapphire Sleet infrastructure. I'm pretty sure it was like I don't know if it was a C2 or what, but there was some overlap with that, so they may or may not be involved. And essentially, installing Axios via npm, I don't know if you can install it any other way, will trigger a post-install lifecycle hook, which will activate an obfuscated Node.js dropper, essentially like going back to a C2, and then there's a variety of commands which are, like I said, OS agnostic, so no matter what you're on. As you can see on the right, there's just the differences between the different OSs, the stuff it runs, and they all call back to this frclac.com, whatever URL. So yeah, kind of interesting, like slightly widely affecting, not super massive. This next one though, by Team PCP, is pretty big though. They have over the past month sort of jumped around and targeted a bunch of different tools: Trivy, Kix, LightLLM, and the Python SDK of Telnix. So I originally started with Trivy and Kix a while ago, and they essentially like did some supply chain stuff that were ran by GitHub Actions and also PyPy registries. So automatically having these cred grabbers go, and they got tokens and whatever variety of creds, and so they affected Trivy and Kix, and then from those more info stealers, which led to the infection of LightLLM, which is like an AI gateway. Trivy and Kix, by the way, are like security tools. I'm not too familiar with them, but I'm pretty sure they're used for like security for infrastructure stuff. And as you can see, it roughly results in the effect of like 500,000 infected machines and over 300 gigabytes of data and secrets. So that's pretty big. That's a quote from from Palo Alto's like 42 group. And also they use those creds to target an additional 48 packages. So pretty big effect. And then on this next slide, I have this post from, I don't know exactly where the source is, I guess some hacker forum, about talking with this Vect ransomware organization, working with Team PCP. I thought this was kind of interesting because it kind of shows how organized these groups actually are. I mean, they're pretty massive, and nowadays, like ransomware as a service has become a pretty big thing. So it's kind of impressive how much actually goes on behind the scene and like their work to target companies. So that's the news. There's my sources. Yeah, Unit 42. I recently was looking at their website. I'd highly recommend it. They give pretty good in-depth like reviews of these different supply chain attacks. Obviously, they kind of like talk about their own services and try and sell them, but it's still pretty good. Also, Microsoft talking about the Sapphire North Korean group. And without further ado, there's quite a bit of research today. First up, Jonathan Bateman on breaking deepfakes with shared secrets. VRig with, I don't know who exactly is participating in it, but Gian and some others talking about memory allocators. Max talking about his personal experience with the OSCP. And Shreyan's talking about your network has been compromised with malware. I don't know entirely what that entails, but it sounds interesting. So let's get into it. You can bring your laptop on. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, take a real sec. Okay. You good? Yeah, awesome. All right, what is up, everyone? Can everyone hear me okay if I talk at this level? Yeah? Okay, so my name is Jonathan Bateman. I was a CSEC student my first 2 years, and then I switched over to SOIS because I wanted to do more math and CS stuff. This is a talk that I just gave in Taiwan at the Open Source Cryptography Workshop. And essentially, that's like an affiliated workshop with Real World Crypto, RWC. So I guess my first major encouragement is like the research you guys are doing here, just submit it to places. Like people love students. If you have an interesting talk that you've given or an idea that you're working on, I would highly recommend submitting to like workshops because I didn't have to like submit a paper because I'm not ready to write a paper yet on this. Like it's like still early development. But it's the Open Source Crypto Workshop, just a background on it. Basically, companies, open source projects will submit work that they've been doing related to crypto. So like PyPI, it's pronounced PyPI actually. I learned because someone from PyPI was there. They did some stuff. Signal was there talking about secure backups, like a feature they just rolled out. So a really cool venue. So quick roadmap. We're going to talk motivation for this project, methodology, the protocol overview, because this is like a protocol that I'm trying to work out and figure out like how to make something that other people can use in other formats and in other like messaging apps and things like that. We'll talk security, considerations, takeaways, future work, and then gonna get you guys on a hands-on demo. My demo crashed in Taiwan, which is a good sign that people are using it, but hopefully it won't crash this time. So if we talk about motivation, so just overall, just thinking about AI and how like the threat landscape has changed in a lot of ways. What we used to think were like secure channels aren't really secure channels. So like, for example, end-to-end encryption on Zoom, it is like a secure channel, but trying to verify like the other person on the end of that encrypted channel is hard to do with deepfakes. And then, you have your classic like insecure channels, like on social media or SIM swap attacks, anything related to SMS. And then I wanted to point out the whole Signal group idea. So we had like the whole Signalgate debacle last summer. And again, like that was like an encrypted channel, but the wrong person was added to a group chat. And the common thread is basically that identity is decided at the human layer and not necessarily at the cryptographic layer. And the identity binding problem. So I've taken like all the crypto classes here at RIT, but no one ever told me what the identity binding problem is, like the oldest problem in crypto you've never heard of. And so basically this idea of how do you assign an identity to a key, right? Alice and Bob can generate keys, but how am I supposed to actually make sure that the Bob I know in real life is the one that is giving me their public key and it's not just someone pretending to be Bob? And like people have tried to solve this issue in the past. You have CAs, PGP. I only know one person in the entire world that actually uses like PGP keys on emails, and it's like a crypto professor who's like an unk kind of, but that's beyond the point. Keybase was a really cool company, but they got acquired by Zoom and kind of like shut down. They were trying to solve this problem, and they were doing it well with like social media profiles and like kind of bootstrapping trust in that regard. And why traditional authentication still fails. So of course we all know, phishing with passwords and 2FA. Krebs on Security did something crazy recently with like the idea of a whole entire website, like a proxy being set up for like a real website and submitting creds through there. And then of course with biometrics, it takes about 3 seconds of audio to make a realistic deepfake. I've tried it myself on like an old Razer laptop I have. I got about 10 frames looking like Jamal Murray with a deepfake that I cooked up. And then at the end, like even secure apps fail when the victim believes the caller is real. And this whole thing was inspired by the fact that I live in Rochester for most of the year, but I'm from Denver. So like, how is my mom supposed to know that it's like really me FaceTiming her or her Signal or whatever? And the key point is that deepfakes target the human decision point, not the crypto. Like I really want to put like emphasize that like we as security researchers and security people, we got to think about how our technologies are deployed and like the usability of everything that we make. And I kind of put this out there to the audience at Real World Crypto. I said, well, Real World Crypto is if a user can maneuver around it, it isn't secure. And like that being a really major point is that someone can, outmaneuver your design or your security, then is it as secure as you really thought it was? So the constraint is we have to make defeating deepfakes as easy as sending a text. And my idea was my grandmother, she knows how to use the contacts app on her phone. She knows how to FaceTime or call me, and like that's it. So like, how do we work under those constraints and still maintain like high security? And then the question that started this
what does every human have that no AI can fake? And how do we go from I have your public key to I know it's the real you in real life? And this is kind of the process that I started thinking about and like digging into is like, what if there was some sort of shared human memory agreement and challenge response and then the key exchange, right? Then your classic RSA, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and then you can actually have the key and you know it's the real identity of the person in real life. So methodology, I'm a huge like spy fan, you know, and in spy TV shows, in books, you know, you have things like duress signals. You expect these things to be intercepted, right? Like I know that if I like flick my ear, like everyone's gonna see it, but it's only gonna mean something to one person. And this is like still used today, kind of like in like scrappy communications when you need to get a message out. Maybe you're like you've been taken hostage or something, and you like yell out, "The trees are blue" or something crazy, and like you know it means something to someone. But if I hear that as an attacker, like the KGB, like I'm not gonna know. And the through line is that the open channel, you know, it requires private knowledge that only the intended audience or the intended recipient can actually understand. And I'm a huge sci-fi fan. So my mom's a huge Trekkie. I'm a Star Wars fan. We always argue. But one thing that Star Trek does have is this a whole kind of saga of the Starship Enterprise being taken over by shapeshifters, right? And this issue of, okay, like I'm the captain. How am I supposed to know if my second cadet is actually like really them? I'm probably going to ask them, you know, what trainings did I put you through, you know, in cadet school, or what was that one battle that I almost died in? Like something that only that person would have really lived. And that was kind of the inspiration for this protocol, is how do we use the experiences that we have as like a root of trust when we're trying to prove who we are. And then the core insight, what does Bob have that a doppelganger of him doesn't? So I'm thinking like worst case scenario. I'm thinking 100 years out when we find like parallel universes and a version of me shows up to my mom and is like, "Hey mom, you know, can you buy me, you know, Chick-fil-A?" My mom's gonna be like, "How am I supposed to actually know that it's you?" So we know that voice and face are clonable, but something that's inaccessible, at least currently, is our memories, and specifically shared episodic memories. And the idea is to go, is you want something that's, you know, private, that you've only experienced with another person. It has to be high entropy, which basically means there has to be a high degree of uncertainty associated with it, so that it can't just be like hacked or someone can kind of guess it. And it has to be unforgeable. And then what is the doppelganger protocol? So essentially, it is a memory-gated verification protocol for deepfake era communication. And it's about authenticating a person by proving shared experience without trusting their audio, their video, or the biometrics. And of course, we are all familiar with the naive approach, right? Every bank in America, healthcare provider, et cetera, when you sign up for a backup code or of some sort, you know, they still use the classic, in what city were you born, what's your mother's maiden name, and, you know, it's super easy. You can do a quick Google search, you know, with AI especially, you can figure this stuff out. So the design requirements, and this is kind of inspired by the crypto side, is like when you're designing a cryptographic protocol, you want to think high entropy. In my case, it has to be semantically flexible because I might imagine or remember something slightly different than the way that you did. But if it's close enough, that's the concept I'm kind of going for. And it has to be something that you experienced. So these are kind of some good memory questions that I want to help formulate or push people towards. So, for example, in what cities were our layovers on the way to Robo Crypto 2026, right? So for me, you know, I went west and I like stopped in a couple different cities before I got to Taiwan, right? That's something that, yes, an attacker could figure out if they were to like go through the call logs, or not the flight logs, and like all the possible routes. Like you could try and figure that out, but the idea is that this is a bootstrapping protocol, right? I only have to get it once and then establish encrypted communication, versus an attacker has to try and beat me to bootstrapping, to impersonating me before encrypted communication happens. So it's kind of like I'm trying to place the emphasis on the attacker and make their job as hard as humanly possible, especially from an OSINT perspective. But the question becomes, how do we turn natural language answers into something we can test mathematically, right? This is where the cryptography and the applied math side comes in. Is it can't just be ad hoc, it has to be like provably secure. So for those of you not familiar, actually, guys, just to raise a hand, who knows what an embedding model is? Anyone? Okay, that's good. It's good that you guys don't know, because you're gonna learn. So an embedding model is essentially the underlying technology of an LLM. So like when you type in like ChatGPT, please rephrase this sentence to me. Back in 2010, in the 2010s at Google, they came up with a model that basically took text, turned into tokens, and then turned that into vector space. So if anyone's taken linear algebra, you know you can have a 12 12 like dimension vector, or you can go in higher dimensions. And the idea was, how can I represent text in a mathematical way that then I can start doing computations on it? Because like LLMs don't actually understand what we're saying. They only understand numbers. We have to go from number to that. So for a quick little demonstration, I just wanted to show you, like, you can do this on your own laptop. There's a runtime called, make this bigger. So there's a runtime called Ollama, and Ollama is basically written in Go. It's essentially you can download models locally and just mess around with them. So you can download vision models or video models, and you can basically download embedding models specifically. So this is All Mini LM. This is the one I'm using in this one. And All Mini LM basically has been trained on a bunch of text, albeit copyrighted text, and it's going to convert this sentence into a 384 dimensional vector. And the idea is, like, this is like a somewhat unique representation of this sentence in mathematical form, right? So the idea with the protocol is convert a question or a memory into mathematical format. And then if you've taken linear algebra, you can do something called cosine similarity, which is really cool. On the next slide. So you can do something called cosine similarity. I'll go one slide ahead. That second dot. So, E dotted with E hat, over the length or the dimension of the vectors is a super simple formula, but it's really powerful because it can be any dimension. And speaking of dimensionality, so these different models, different embedding models have different dimensions. So like All Mini LM just happens to be 384. There's other ones from other open source companies and proprietary models too. You want to make sure that if you are doing this, the models have to match. Like, I can't try and compare a memory embedded that's 384 with one that's 512 because the math doesn't work out. And then in terms of security, these models were never designed to be used in secure contexts, and that's kind of part of the problem with prompt injections and things like that. But the idea is, how can we do this local first? And then kind of the mechanism is basically you want to go from an answer A to an embedding. And then on the other end, for example, Bob's end, he's going to have his answer and then go to another embedding. So the toy example is basically like park in Taipei versus park in Taiwan. Those are going to be semantically similar versus if it's park in Taipei versus a park car. Based on training data, those would be super far in their training sets because they're like nowhere near related to each other. And then to go down to bullet 3, we're only going to accept this semantic similarity score if it's past the threshold. So the idea comes into play is, well, how similar should these answers be in order for Alice to accept that Bob is who she thinks she is? So in the demo I have towards the end, I just set it to 75%, just as like a ad hoc number. So I'm kind of like messing around, seeing what threshold works and which one is accepted, because you want to make it so stringent, like with security questions, sometimes I forget, did I capitalize NYC or did I capitalize my mother's maiden name and put a space? Like that, those are kind of the problems that you run into. And then for the protocol overview itself, in the demo that I submitted and have set up for you guys, basically the idea is, you have Alice on a browser, you're gonna have a server in the middle. We want to make sure that the server never sees either the private key of either Alice or Bob. It only is going to see the public keys that they submit to one another. And you basically want the server to act as a session relay. And on each browser end or like locally, you want Alice and Bob to generate their keys separately. And the goal is that Alice and Bob derive the same shared key, with the server never seeing their private key. And then just for like a quick step-by-step flow, so Alice is going to generate her secret key, SKA, and her public key. She's going to export that public key as something called a JSON web key. That's just a JSON format for public keys in the browser or for the web. She's going to create a question queue and have her answer A. And then she's going to compute that embedding. So she's essentially going to say, All Mini LM, take this question, convert it to that vector. And she's basically going to publish that as well as the embedding to the server. And I'm just using Redis for this. And then it's going to wait for Bob to respond with his question and answer, which is on the next slide. So Bob's going to open the link, look at the question, come up with his answer. Well, first he's going to generate his keys on his side of the browser. He's going to submit his answer to that question. So he's going to say, okay, All Mini LM, take my answer, embed it, post it to the server. And the server gate is basically going to compute the cosine similarity of those two answers together. And then if and only if, right, that threshold is passed with the similarity score, is Alice going to then release her public key to Bob, and vice versa. And what's funny is, like, I love math, but I hate mathematical notation. But just to quickly go through kind of the key derivation process is, okay, Alice now has this public key from Bob. She's going to use elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman to derive that deterministic key. And a quick note, as I was in Taiwan, one of the people sitting right in the front was this guy at NYU who back in the early 2000s came up with this idea of fuzzy PAKES, which is password authenticated key exchange. And the idea is, how do you derive a deterministic key from fuzzy information, right? Instead of it having to be the exact same. So that's kind of like some further research that I was just made aware of. And that's the benefit of presenting in front of experts and people that know more than you. So for step 11, Bob's going to receive Alice's public key. He's going to derive his version of that key using elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and then you can check to make sure that it's the same key on both ends. And so quick notes at the bottom. So private keys are never going to leave the browsers. The survey relays the public key only, so it's going to be key blind, and then the memory verification gates the entire exchange. And then a quick overview. So what the server actually sees. So Alice's key, the private key is not going to be seen. Bob isn't going to be seen. I want to point your attention specifically to the embeddings. So right now, the demo that I have, and this is like a limitation / future work, is the embeddings itself, like that vector, is seen by the server. And like that's a security hole that I have to fix. What's cool is that in the AI space right now, there are a lot of local models that are being developed. So if you've ever heard of Hugging Face, they produced a JavaScript package for embeddings in browser. So just like how you can produce keys in browser, there is that possibility, and that's very recent. So that's something I want to add to the demo later on, and that's like a security flaw, so something I have to improve upon. The question itself is assumed to be able to be public, right? So if someone sees that my mom and I argue about a certain television show, that in and of itself, I don't think is inherently insecure. Granted, there is OSINT capabilities with AI and things like that, but the idea is that that question should be able to be public. And then, of course, the public keys are seen by the server. And then security considerations, already talked about it a little bit, but one-way trust is half the job. So, like, why should Bob trust Alice, right? In this case, Alice is the one initiating it, but the idea is eventually to expand it so that Bob can ask Alice a question, like, where did we first meet? Or what class did we first meet at RIT? Something really specific to their experience so that Bob can also verify the other way. And then the add-on would be, this exchange is only going to be complete if and only if both the similarity score of Alice and the threshold is met on her end, and the similarity score of Bob is met on his end too. And then another idea I had in terms of enhancing the security is adding multiple questions, and then almost having like a random rotation of which question gets sent to the other person. And because you have more than one question, this can be used if down the line, like let's say you're in a messaging app and you make a reference to something and they don't get it. And it's like, hey, like this person should know what I'm referencing. Let me go send a random security question to that person in that moment that they have to answer within a certain time limit. But in order to do that, you have to have multiple questions to give up. The core idea is just basically that the security grows with pool size, because more questions means you can't predict what could possibly be asked. And then I talked a little bit about the continuous authentication and basically being able to send a random question at any point in the future. I can almost imagine this being used as something like Signal, where journalists and people in high-risk environments often join these Signal group chats because they're secure, but who's to say, especially if the link is public, that someone else couldn't join? And we've actually seen that, for example, with protests in Minneapolis and things like that, and even in countries around the world where you have a secure channel, but it's public and anyone can join. And then I mentioned this earlier, but just this idea of bootstrapping in general and the advantage of initiating and trying to establish trust with someone else, it's really cool because my idea was, how do I put as much pressure on the attacker? How do I make their job worse and harder to actually execute? And the idea is basically a time pressure shift where, let's say someone wants to impersonate a journalist. Like I'm a whistleblower and I want to reach out to a journalist. The attacker would have to try and impersonate the journalist and know the answer to the question, all before I can actually get to the real journalist and establish trust with them. Like that's kind of the idea, is like turning the tide a little bit instead of just, an attacker. We always talk about an attacker with infinite resources and infinite time. But what if they had limited resources and limited time? And then security considerations. So man in the middle attack, let's say the link is intercepted or forwarded. That actually isn't an issue because that question, granted, it does need to be a strong question, can be public. The replay attack in terms of deepfakes, this is like one of the biggest issues, is you can basically generate a new session and a fresh challenge to kind of thwart a deepfake, because the whole idea is if you can replay my video or audio, like companies like Jumio that do like the document detection for KYC, that's like know your customer. Their issue that they're facing is people can just keep on trying. You can just keep on generating documents, fake passports, fake IDs, and keep on submitting. It's like it's just never ending. And then device compromise, it's something that I am thinking about, but I think it's out of scope right now. I know our friends over at Apple, they're doing their best, and we have organizations like Citizen Lab at University of Toronto that are really good with focusing on the spyware aspect when it comes to journalists and their devices. So that's like a little bit out of scope, but I am thinking about it. And then kind of some of the takeaways is that basically deepfakes, they break voice and video trust. And the idea with the doppelganger protocol is that it verifies human shared memory challenges themselves. And furthermore, the idea of on-device keys, minimal disclosure, and I didn't add it here, but also on-device AI. So I think that's the cool thing that we're seeing is a lot of people are really pushing for the edge, right? How do I run AI on my device with no internet so that I don't have to send something to a server? And I think that's a really good threat model to be thinking about. And as models get faster and smaller, we'll start to see that more and more. And the general consensus is bootstrapping trust before requesting money, access, or secrets. And the idea is verify the person, not the media. So what's next? Coming up, I'm working on an idea called a memory entropy score. So as we know with password requirements, it's like minimum 12 characters. Make sure that you use an exclamation mark. But how do we measure the entropy or the strength of a memory question itself, right? These AI models were never used, or security was never a consideration. So that's what I'm kind of thinking about. I'm thinking about using kind of 4 dimensions of like temporal, spatial, contextual, etc. for a question, and basically saying, if you were to look at my LinkedIn right now, what could you infer? Like thinking like an OSINT attacker, how far could you get? What things could you infer just by looking at what's publicly available about me? And then actually customizing and saying, okay, this amount of information is out there about me. What if my memory entropy score is different than yours because you have an Instagram and you post on TikTok every day, right? So our threat models are slightly different and you're giving up more information than I am. So my questions will be slightly different. But with passwords, it's just kind of like the same strength for everyone, which is fine. I mentioned local embeddings already. And then now that I've gotten some feedback from cryptographers, I think the next step is to actually produce a white paper and talk about the primitives and like the actual formal kind of verification and some of those specs. And then keep on iterating with the open source community that I've been able to connect with. I got some really good people I want to collaborate with in other spaces. So now we're gonna get into the demo. So if you, I did do some work on it, so shouldn't crash now. But if you go to doppelgangerprotocol.app, the idea is I want everyone to pair up with someone. If you know them, that's great. If you don't know them, that's also great. But the idea is you can basically, one person's going to be like Alice, and you're going to hit start verification. You'll type in your name and shared memory question. So this could be a question that is specific to the person next to you in this room right now that no one else would know if they weren't here. Or it could be an internal memory or something that you share with that person. So, for example, the question I had cooked up for the demo in Taiwan was like, in what city were our layovers? Because a lot of people flew there together. So, and then I'll just say, I don't know, Chicago, Denver, and then Seattle, for example. That'll generate a link that you can pass on to the other person. The idea is you could send this link over any channel, or you can scan the QR code if you're sitting next to someone. If Bob were to open that link, or the friend that you're going to share that with, right, he's going to see the question, and he's going to be able to answer it. And then he could say, Seattle, Denver. Like, it doesn't have to, that's the beautiful thing about these embedding models. The order doesn't matter. The case doesn't matter. It's all about semantic meaning. So Seattle, Denver, Chicago, right? So the order didn't matter. And in this case, it was super high. So it was like 99% match, as you can see. And if you go to the protocol log, I kind of walk through every step of the protocol process of the keys being generated in the browser. So if you know anything about elliptic curves, you have a public X, a public Y. It's going to send a GET request, et cetera, and walk you through that. So I'll give you guys like, what are we doing on time? We're doing time. I'll give you guys like 5 minutes. Try this with someone next to you. See if you can kind of complete the protocol, and then we'll get into questions. And let me know if it crashes.
In the app, how do I like import the contact?
In the app itself?
Yeah.
I'll oh, we'll do this because I'll get to that later. Oh yeah, I wanted to show the protocol. Yeah, or maybe what I should say is people from this side get up and go to this side. That way you actually like meet someone new and don't just sit with the same people. Yeah, well, but the idea is what in this room could you use as a trust anchor? But that's the idea. But let's say you're separated by 500 miles, right? You need something that Jamie knows without sharing it over the answer over a specific channel. And then a quick thing. So in this format, I made sure to have an expiration on that link so that if it is completed, like an attacker can't go in and just look at the question and kind of keep on ruminating on it. So I'll give it like 2 more minutes and then we can get into questions and everything. That's yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to do quick acknowledgments to the organizing team over at Open Source Crypto. Really cool team. The organizers are from Mozilla, Google, and some other cool spots. I'm grateful to be able to share this work with you guys and my team over at RealX Real, and then professors here at RIT, Dr. Radazowski, Dr. Reed, Dr. Brumley, my friend Angela, and then my team at OpenBWC has been looking over this as I've been working on it. So, any questions? We have some time for questions. Yeah.
Can you talk more about the memory school? Because I like the thing that you're saying about making sure that it's good questions and that it's strong enough. But it's so difficult that you cannot answer it. And for example, one time my bank flagged something and they had to verify me because they're like calls. There's like on my bank. And they first of all they asked me if I had another phone number to verify it. I go to the launch a new verification where it was public information identity. Information that's out there in the public. I hated it because it was questions like which town managers are living at this time. So yeah, kind of like that's an example like I'm the person who's supposed to get this.
Yeah.
Not answer it for my own account. So how does that apply to me?
Yeah, so that's a great question because with memory entropy score, I didn't realize I needed it until I started trying to build it out. And I was like, exactly what you're saying. What happens if someone doesn't remember the obscure memory that I might like try and reference? So two things: the memory entropy score. The idea is to measure the strength of the question. So that's like the first goal of the memory entropy score: is is this a good question to just ask? Period. Right? If you ask like, when is my birthday? Like that's a terrible question, right? Because I can just go to someone's Instagram and they have it right there. So I guess the first piece. The other goal of the memory entropy score is to analyze the strength of the answer, right? Because you have like the question, like there's a whole question space. Like if you think of like sets in math, like you have like the set of all the possible answers to the question, and then you have the set of what the actual answer is itself. So if the answer to some question is, April 2nd, that is like a very narrow answer space. So the idea is with memory entropy score is how do I make both as big as possible and as hard to like the needle in the haystack problem for the attacker for both. And then the second piece of that overall about memory entropy, I guess the doppelganger protocol in general is I'm still trying to work out how do I help people converge to the same memory if you do ask a question. So the idea is, okay, strong question. Now, how do I push users to something that's a strong question, like encourage them in some way? And then now that I encourage you that way, I know that the answer is also strong too. So that's part of the inspiration. Like I just kind of had to come up with that to solve another problem I didn't realize existed. Yeah.
Question building off of that I had when I first saw the demo, I'm from Collins.
Yeah.
So have you like actually run any like human studies to see like if the questions that people will put in there are like Googleable or hosted? That was like a thought I had at first.
Yes.
Like, okay, I feel like people are just kind of like because they don't know what's
yes.
So have you actually like done any like tests to see one, is it a problem? Two, is a memory entropy score like necessary and like essentially to help you go to bound? Like have you done anything like that?
Yeah, so I was thinking of doing an IRB study like next semester. I wanted to build out like the mobile app and the protocol first, and then like I do have like users for the contacts app itself. I don't know what their questions are because like I try to keep that all on device and everything. But just from like walking through it with people in person, like they do tend to ask bad questions, and that's why I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of a user experience problem. Because again, I at the very start of the talk I said, if someone can maneuver around it, it's not secure. So the idea is how do I, from a UX perspective, say, okay, you said when is my birthday? Could I maybe have something in the UI that pushes someone says, hey, that's a bad question. Here are some recommendations, for example. That's what I'm thinking about in terms of usability. Yeah.
Yeah. Building off this whole thing, and I know this is still a topic that you're trying to figure out, but what makes a good question to interview?
Yeah, the idea is something that's private that you've never posted to social media before. I think that's like the bare minimum like requirement. But the challenges with like data breaches and everything is there's so much data out there. But I think to assume like what you've publicly posted as being your vulnerability or search space is a good place to start. And one interesting thing, I kind of wanted to do a homework assignment for the RITSEC community. Well, I think it is interesting. Take your favorite internet service, right? Discord, Spotify, Google, and figure out how to request your data for one service. So like for me, I've done it, like I can actually show you. I've done it for Spotify and for a bunch of other services, thinking about, okay, like my data's out there. What does it look like? And like Google, let me find it for Google, because like I have my like childhood email I've had since I was like 12 years old. Let me see. Or I'll do LinkedIn actually. I'll do LinkedIn. So like this is like all my LinkedIn data, like that they've sent me. So like my education and like endorsements received and job applications and everything. So like all this data is just out there. So if LinkedIn were to have a data breach tomorrow, like this is all the data that would get leaked. So I think it's a good kind of practice to think about like the data that companies are storing and assume that it's already been released or already been breached, and that is your search space specifically. So I think what I want to do is think about the memory entropy score as a derivative of what's out there about you specifically, and kind of tailor that. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'll go for you.
So like each person is kind of like the nose in the graph. So each question represents like an edge. for a given person, wouldn't they have to create a unique question with each of their contacts? So what's like the practicality of creating a unique high-intensity question for each person that you know? And I guess storing all those questions, just questions will grow exponentially as more and more people.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the mobile app, the real external mobile app, I was thinking about threat models, right? So like, what are the 5 people that if they were to be deepfaked tomorrow and ask you for money, you would probably give them money, right? So for me, like that's my mom, my sister, my dad, my stepmom, and like maybe my best friend, right? Like those 5 people, I think are like the most important. And then when it comes to like the government context, like imagine a world where like Signalgate doesn't happen because in order to join that group chat that shouldn't be on Signal, you have to ask a question like, what are the military codes, or I don't know, like some sensitive information that like the scalability question doesn't really, they don't care about it because they just need it to be hyper secure. Like that's one thing I'm thinking about in terms of like how this could apply to a business context. You're right, like 100-person company, I can't have 99 memories with every other employee. But what's interesting is a web of trust. And this is what like PGP was starting and trying to get at, but the whole issue became key management, right? Like you can't manage 99 keys for emails and like people you've never met. But the good thing about being in an organization is that organizations typically manage that anyway, as like your internal CA or web of trust, etc. So that's kind of like some of the things I'm thinking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
James?
So with apps like Signal, iMessage protocol, like your identity is already binded to your account with keys. So what's stopping from gaining those protocols only, right? So like, because when you're on your phone, if you use SMS, right, obviously your security is important. But like if I'm in a known like iMessage chat, what's stopping me from essentially asking the same question? Like I'm texting my mom, right, and I see something and I ask her like our security question,
Yeah.
and she replies. Where is the difference cryptographically between those two? Between iMessage, me sending the question in there, and the doppelganger protocol? What she admit?
Yeah, that's also that's actually the most common question I get.
Okay.
Like I was talking to an alumni when I was kind of pitching this idea to him, and he was like, "Why? I have enterprise grade Slack. Why don't I just message people over Slack?" The issue is that these channels were never meant to be secure in the first place, right? So, for example, someone's email, if I compromise your email, I'm probably getting into your Slack, I'm probably getting into your Discord, I'm probably getting recovery codes if I need to reset a password. With iMessage, it's slightly different. With that, it's not necessarily about the security, but it's more about usability. And this is why, like, do you want to have to text every single time you need to verify something? No, you don't want that question and answer in the message itself, because like that opens up a huge can of worms in and of itself. So the idea is you only ask the question once, and this is more the mobile app side, like my threat model for the mobile app. You ask the question once, exchange keys, and then I just do push notifications, right? Because Apple push notifications, for example, are super secure. I know that that push notification is going directly to that device, but I need a way to bootstrap trust to get that device ID.
Yeah. So it's like a big part of it that this is never actually like that. There's no file on device storing your question and your answer.
Exactly. The idea is the question will be there, and the person has the knowledge in their mind, right? I can pull that up, but it's just about bootstrapping trust and then using all the amazing cryptography that already exists versus having to constantly ask questions and message people. That opens you up to attackers intercepting it. And when it comes to spyware, nation state level stuff, it's like, well, it's all there in the SMS. And then the other threat model I was thinking about is SIM swap attacks, right? Is like, okay, yeah, it's cryptographically secure, but if I call Verizon and say, hey, I want to change my phone plan, now suddenly someone else is getting my text messages.
Another question about your like threat model. So your current threat model assumes a trustworthy server, correct?
Yes, in this doppelganger demo, it does. Yeah.
Have you done any work into assuming a non-trustworthy server with like different fuzzy hashing or other techniques?
Yeah, so it's funny. When I was at Open Source Crypto, someone gave an amazing talk on password managers and like the whole server compromise situation, and that's kind of the idea that it's cool because this intersects with like the privacy side. Is like non-repudiation is really good for security, but it's not always good for privacy, right? Because you can identify someone if you can prove that it was sent from a particular identifier specific person. So what I envision for the server model is almost like kind of like a Signal model, where it's like with their encrypted backups that they just released, they encrypt the data locally on device, and then it goes up to the server, and it's a unique device that like identifier that's separate from the device itself. But if I like install Signal on a new device, I can still pull down my backups and decrypt them, but no, they won't know who it belongs to. So that's kind of like what I'm thinking and playing around with. And that's why on in the mobile app itself, in the backend that I'm running there, my next improvement is the server side, because like that's been the whole. Yeah.
If you go to your slide where you have the math for doing the comparison of a question to an
This one. This one.
You can use homomorphic encryption for this, right? Probably.
I'm not a.
Multiplication, so you just need a homomorphic encryption scheme that supports multiplication, and then the server never knows anything.
Yeah, yeah. The difficulty about homomorphic encryption and some of the zero knowledge stuff is that they're so slow.
Yeah.
And they're hard to implement. Like again, it's like you can have infinitely more security, but then like usability, the speed, notificate, like all that kind of goes out the window, and it's like that tight balance. But there has been some progress in like faster ZK proofs and things like that. So, but that is something that's on my mind as well.
And then I have one other question. So, do you currently do verification of the image of your server? Because your code is public, right?
Yes. Well, so the code for the mobile app isn't public right now because it's a mess, and I'm trying to clean it up for like open source contributions, and I don't want to get cooked. So it will be public. I'm just. Yes. For the doppelganger demo, yes. For real external, no.
Okay.
But for this, yes. You can see the.
Public the server?
Yeah.
Okay. When you do you plan on having like a function in the app where you can like verify the image? Like, this is something that Apple just added with the AI features, right?
Yeah.
Like all of the models that are like your image model that is verifiable.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
So you can like, I think that would be super cool, like for like kind of your customer base and what you're going for.
Yeah.
Is because their server code is already public, you can essentially verify like basically the hash of the document container. Right?
Got it.
Your document container is going to be public.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that would be.
That's cool. I didn't think about that.
Also, are you accepting contributions on your public repo?
Yeah. So this repo, everything for this is public. I'm still like cleaning up my backend for the actual mobile app deployment and everything. But the idea is make this the standard that like keeps on getting contributions, and people like you and everyone here that are smarter than me. Like I didn't even think about the verifying the server piece. Like if Bitwarden or somebody came up with like one of the password managers, like that would be amazing, for example. So cool. Anything else? We're short on time. Yeah. Sorry, say that again.
What is the best way to authenticate that you did a RITSEC presentation?
A token of some sort?
Say RITSEC lanyard.
What? Thank you. Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, so it's all open source. You can submit a PR. I'm going to be working on the SDK this summer because I think one thing I want to do, it would be cool for Signal. They have a CLI tool. So imagine like creating a Signal group chat. If you want to invite a friend to it, you will get a message from like a little Signal bot that says, hey, answer this question before you. So that's kind of what I'm looking up. So thank you.
Thank you. Who's up next? Is it VRig or is it?
Yeah, VRig.
Just do VRig?
VRig freshman. I just put VRig. I used to put VRig freshman. I don't know. It's like Gian and some other freshmen in that are involved in VRig.
Cool.
You should ask them yourself.
I just wanted to point this out. My name
I don't know. Is Zoom? Oh, his mic was muted. Yeah. We're ready when you are. Did you guys join the Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. Just gotta share your screen. Awesome. There you go. All right, it's real set. We're all set.
Do you want to put that laptop here? I don't think. Oh, I don't think the microphones, because the first presentation didn't use it. Okay. Oh man, should we start, guys?
Yeah, grab the microphone.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Okay. We're starting, guys. All right, everybody. We are with VREC, and we're presenting about our research we did with memory allocators. Yeah. Thank you.
So first off, we're going to go over basically the parts of an allocator. So when a program needs memory, especially during execution, it doesn't directly interface with the physical memory. Instead, it goes through what's called an allocator, which acts as a middle layer between the program and the actual memory system. So it keeps track of which parts of memory are being used and which parts are currently free for use. And when that memory is freed, it decides how to best use the memory to best efficiently use it. A good allocator has to balance three separate things. First, it has to be fast, and it also has to have space efficiency, and it also has to avoid fragmentation as much as possible. So memory storage is split into separate parts. You have your registers, you have your caches, you have your main memory, so your RAM, and then you can have your secondary memory at a different source. So these would include program instructions, your variables, your temporary data during execution. Not all this memory is equal. As you can see, the register being the smallest and your secondary memory being the largest, there's a big disparity in how much you can store at each location. But with these smaller memory sizes, you can also access the memory a lot faster. And so with the smaller registers, you can access data a lot faster than you can at a secondary site. So it incentivizes you to put as much memory as you can into the register for faster access. But you can't store a ton in there, which is one space where the allocator tries to efficiently manage where it's storing. This balance allows programs to run efficiently without requesting all memory being extremely fast and expensive. One flaw of this would be if you have a program that uses very memory intensive, you're going to have to cycle between your caches and everything, which could cause some problems down the line. So with these problems, you can have memory leaks. This happens when a program is allocating a lot of memory, but it never actually ends up freeing it. So over time, this can reduce available memory and eventually crash the program. This is especially a problem with your smaller registers as you have very limited space. So all the space in the register is very valuable for use. Slow access, especially with the larger backup storages. So if you don't keep moving stuff into the register, your program will run a lot slower. There's a risk for data loss as you're transferring in between each of the layers. So you have to ensure that each layer understands where it's at. And there's also security risks, such as improper memory access, where you're accessing memory that you shouldn't have access to, or allocating in areas where you shouldn't have allocator access to. One of the main problems mentioned earlier was fragmentation. So each of these blocks has within it separate blocks of specific sizes. So when the allocator puts in memories of certain sizes, it'll find the best fit for specific memories. So as you can see, technically these blocks all fit in, but now we have 50 kB of unused space, which could prevent us from allocating another 50 kB. Even though it technically does fit the other two assigned spaces, that's a massive waste and something you really want to minimize when you're using an allocator. There are two main types of this fragmentation. There's the external fragmentation, which is when memory is scattered in small little chunks across the heap, and you have fragmentation in between them. And then there's also internal fragmentation, when a program is given more memory than it actually needs. So if your program only needs 10 kB, but you give it 15 kB, that's 5 kB of wasted space every time, which can add up, especially in smaller programs. There's two main types of memory allocations. You have your static memory allocation, your dynamic memory allocation. For static memory allocation, this deals specifically with your stack. The size must be known before the program runs, and such you cannot change it as the program is being executed. This allows it to run efficiently and as safe as possible because it cannot grow or shrink throughout the course of the program. Whereas dynamic memory allocation deals with your heap. This will be manually managed, and the size can be decided as the program runs, so you can shift how much memory is allocated in specific places. This is often manually managed, but depending on the program, it can also be managed there. There's mainly the process memory layout. This separates the code data and execution memory. This improves your program organizational and supports dynamic allocation. This allows increased security and stability as you can segment exactly where in memory you want each thing to be stored. So if you need to grab something, you know where it is and where it ends. So first there's the stack. The stack stores function calls, parameters, and local variables. This is automatically managed. This is what you would deal with if you had static memory allocation. It grows downwards towards the heap and is often at the top. Then you have your heap, which is dealing with your dynamic memory allocation. This is managed manually by the programmer and grows upwards towards the stack. So this is where you'd be assigning all of your memory if you were managing it yourself. There's the data segment, which stores global and static variables. That's split into the initialized data, which has your predefined values, and then your uninitialized data, which is often null or zeros. The data segment structure organizes long-term data in a predictable way for your program to grab it and for you to understand where the data is. And then finally, there's the text segment, which is where your actual code is. This stores the compiled program instructions. It's typically a read-only space and it can be shared between multiple processes. And then there's specifically your memory management. So this is how you're actually managing the memory, specifically in C. Programs use specific functions to allocate, resize, and free memory. These functions give programmer control over the memory usage, especially in dynamic scenarios. However, this comes a lot of problems when you're using it. So first off, there's malloc. Malloc is used to allocate your block of memory at runtime. It handles unknown or changing values of size. So you can enable dynamic data structures. It gives control over your memory usage, and it allocates only when needed. So you can pass in certain variables of size that you don't know yet that is compiled during your runtime. The one important thing to remember is that the memory is not initialized. It may contain random values from previous use. Because of this, the program must manually initialize the memory before using it, and malloc is common. Calloc is very similar to malloc, but instead of reusing old data, it initializes all the values to 0. It also allocates memory at runtime, and as such, it is useful for arrays and structs, and safer for predictable starting states. So you can specify how many blocks of how many sizes you want, which is why it's particularly useful for arrays and lists. Then there's realloc. Realloc is used to resize an existing block of memory. So you can take in a pointer to some form of memory. It can either increase or decrease the size depending on what the program requires. If there's enough space, the memory is expanded in the place that it is in memory. Otherwise, it may be moved to a new location that can house the specific size. It makes realloc especially useful for dynamic data structures like arrays that you may need to grow over time to handle all your data. And then finally, there's free. This just takes whatever memory you've allocated and removes any unused. This prevents memory leaks and returns the memory to the system. and allows your memory reuse. So when you're dynamically assigning, if you're running out of space, or if you have something that you no longer need, you need to free it so that it can be used by other parts of the program.
Awesome. And now I will talk about some specific memory allocation strategies, so the algorithms that are run when you request memory. And we're gonna cover 3 allocation strategies: bump allocation, linked list allocation, and fixed size block allocation. So let's start with bump allocation. This is the simplest allocation strategy. You only need to keep track of one piece of information, really, the next pointer. So suppose the user requests 8 bytes of memory. While you return the current address of next, then add 8 to the next address, and now you're ready to allocate memory again. So super simple. And that's the main advantage of a bump allocator. It's really easy to implement, and it's extremely fast. You just have to do a single addition wherever you allocate new memory. And there's no fragmentation because we can't exactly free individual memory chunks. And that is the main disadvantage of bump allocators. You can't deallocate memory arbitrarily. For example, you want to deallocate this blue block. Well, how do you do that? You can move the next pointer to the start of the blue block, but, well, we deallocated the red block too. So that's not good. And that brings us to a linked list allocator. A linked list allocator is capable of deallocating those arbitrary memory chunks, and it stores information in a list. The list contains all of the free memory your allocator has, and is commonly called a free list. So to allocate memory, there's 2 general strategies within a linked list allocator. There's best fit, which means finding the smallest free memory chunk that works for the requested size. And there's first fit, which means finding the first free memory chunk that fits. And often the memory chunk we find is probably not gonna fit perfectly with what the user requested. Maybe the user requested 4 bytes, but we wanna give them a 5 byte chunk, well, 8 byte chunk. Well, now you have to split that 8 byte chunk into 2 blocks, one for the 4 byte chunk to give to the user, and another 4 byte chunk to keep in our free list, so we can allocate that again later. So this does mean that allocation is linear time, linear to the number of free chunks we have in our allocator. And to free element in a linked list allocator, you just have to add a new entry to the free list, and that is really simple. However, you usually want to coalesce the free memory chunk. Coalescing means merging the touching free memory chunks together. So we have 2 4-byte free memory chunks that are next to each other. That should really be one 8-byte memory chunk. So that's what coalescing means. And you can use a doubling linked list to make it easier to coalesce both ways. So both the free chunk that's in front of you and the one that's behind you. Also, coalescing makes it a lot faster to clean up the allocator. This does mean that freeing could be linear time if you aren't sorting the free list, because you have to search through the free list to find the addresses of the memory chunks that are before and after you. The main benefit of a linked list allocator is that we can free individual memory now. So we've overcome that challenge from a bump allocator. Also, linked list allocators are pretty efficient with their memory use. The main disadvantage of a linked list allocator is that it's pretty slow. As we saw earlier, most operations are linear to the number of free elements in the free list. And this brings us to the final allocation strategy we're going to be talking about, which is fixed size block allocators. This means having multiple free lists, but each free list only contains free memory of a fixed size. So we only hand out these fixed size blocks of memory instead of any arbitrary memory. So if the user requested 7 bytes, we'll give them 8 bytes instead, assuming we have a block size that's 8 bytes. And here is how that would look. If the user requests, say, 5 bytes, we'll hand them a 16-byte chunk. If the user requests 50 bytes, we'll hand them a 64-byte chunk, and so on. So to allocate memory, you have to find the block size that you want to give to the user. And this could be constant time if you could find some mass relationship between the block size and the requested size. And once you find the right block size, it's just a simple matter of returning the first element in the free list for that block size, which is constant time. So malloc is generally constant time in a fixed size block allocator. And the same goes for free. You just have to find the right linked list. And once you find the right linked list, just add another element to that free list, and you are done with free. So that's also generally constant time. The main benefit of a fixed size block allocator is that it's really fast. Everything is genuinely constant time, and even if we don't have that mass relationship between the requested size and the block size, we just have to search through the nest of block sizes to find the best block size. And we don't usually have that many block sizes in general, so it's gonna be fast even if we have to search through it. And the main disadvantage of a fixed size block allocator is that it wastes a lot of memory. Since we're allocating fixed chunks, we're usually allocating a larger chunk than what the user requested. For example, if the user requested 130 bytes of memory, we would return a 256 byte chunk of memory, assuming our block sizes are powers of 2. That's 126 bytes of wasted memory, which is, well, not memory efficient. So now we're gonna look at a real-life example of a memory allocator.
All right, so the first one that we're going to look at is the glibc allocator. Next slide. It's called ptmalloc2, and it's part of the GNU standard library. It's seen as like a standard implementation since it's widely used, but it's pretty much just a glorified linked list allocator. It's super old though, so it's possible to make faster implementations. There's 4 main components, and those are chunks, which are regions which contain data given to the user when malloc is called. And the chunks also include metadata about the current chunk. There's bins, which hold pointers to the start of linked lists of free chunks, and those are stored inside the arena. And arenas, which are structures that hold all the bin data as well as the heaps it's responsible for. And arenas are stored inside of heaps. Heaps are regions of data that the arena is responsible for, and they can reside in the heap in memory or also memory map segments. When allocating, free chunks get sorted into different bins depending on their size, and unmatched mallocs will carve up the top chunk. So like I said before, heaps store all the data associated with the allocator, excluding mmapped chunks. Those go directly in the memory mapping segment. Heap number 1 holds the main arena, which is stored in the actual heap. Other heaps are mmapped. And notice the separation here between arenas and chunks. Arenas hold data on free lists and have pointers to free chunks, while chunks have the actual data as well as the metadata used to traverse the linked list. Arenas hold all the free lists for the chunks they're responsible for. They only keep track of free chunks, and they don't need to worry about chunks that are in use since they won't be returned by malloc. Only one thread can operate on an arena at a time, which causes a bottleneck for multi-threaded operations. Because of this, there can be multiple arenas, and there's also a per thread cache, which allows for quick allocations. So here's the bins that free chunks are stored in. When mallocing, chunks get sorted into them. There's the fast bin, which is for very small uniform chunks. They don't coalesce, which is kind of a problem, but it also means that they use less metadata, resulting in quick allocation. There's also the unsorted bin, which is temporary storage for free chunks, and those will be sorted in the next large malloc. And the small bin, which is for medium-sized uniform chunks. There's still wasted space here because it's uniform chunks and it's not sized to the exact amount of memory that's needed. The large bin is different in that regard because it carves up the top chunk to match the requested size exactly. And that linked list is sorted largest to smallest using best fit to determine the best chunk to allocate. There's some exceptions to the bins. If it's super small, it'll go straight to the T-cache, which is non-locking, meaning that threads can work on it really quickly. But it's also really small, so it's usually not used for a bunch of operations at once. And also, if it's really large, then it'll go to the memory mapping segment directly. It'll be a map to the mmap region for super big chunks, and it still has chunk metadata, but it's outside of a heap. In-use chunks have some metadata here. You can see that there's the size of the chunk, which is needed for coalescing, as well as the AMP bits, which describe what kind of chunk it is. There's pointers for free list traversal, but only if the chunk is free. The weird ones here are FD next size and BK next size, which are used in large bins to find the next chunk that is a different size. And it's also important to note that malloc returns a pointer to the payload, so the user never sees the metadata.
We're gonna look at some allocators that we actually made with VREG. So first of all, This is the allocator that I made, which is an array-based allocator. So earlier I talked about a linkness allocator. This is basically that, but instead of a linkness, I used an array. So I have this metadata array that points to chunks of memory that I'm gonna hand out to the user. The reason I decided to do this was because I wanted to avoid using a backup allocator like mmap. You know, with a linkness, you have to create nodes and deallocate nodes. That means you have to call mmap or some other backup allocator. And I didn't want to do that, so I chose to use an array. And the array is also sorted by memory addresses to simplify coalescing. But this does mean we have to shift elements in the array around a bunch to keep the order. So that's kind of slow. And I store the metadata separately from the allocated memory. I used to store the metadata just as a header in front of the allocated memory, but then I realized that if the user requests, say, 5 bytes, then they write beyond those 5 bytes. Well, they could be writing into metadata, and that would just break my whole allocator. So I decided to store the metadata in a separate array. And here's my code for allocation. As you can see, I used the best fit strategy here. I looped through all of the free chunks I have and found the one with the smallest difference between the requested size and the free size. And if I couldn't find one that fits, I will print an error message and exit. This is not what a real allocator should do, but this is just a project, so I decided to print an error message. Normally, if you don't have enough memory, the allocator will just return null. And once I find the best fit, I will split the memory chunk into 2 blocks if there's enough space to split the blocks. Then I'll store that new block in the array. And here's my implementation for free. So I got 0 out the free memory for some reason. There's no reason to do this, but I wanted to do it. But the main interesting part is over here, where I'm coalescing the memory. I'm checking the memory chunk that's right in front of me, which would just be the element right in front of me in the array since the array is sorted, and also the element that's right behind me, and merging those if they are both free memory chunks.
All right, and then this is the gamble allocator for VREG. Now, to first understand how this allocator works, we got to go over what's in it. So this allocator, it has 6 arenas. There's only 4 on the diagram because I didn't feel like putting them all on there. But in each arena, it's going to start off with 0 spans. But as you start allocating memory, there will be more spans. I'll get into that. But in each span, it'll just have one giant chunk. So how that works is initially when you first run the allocator, you're just going to have the arenas. No spans, no chunks. It's going to pick a random arena, and then it's going to look inside that arena. No spans. It's going to make a span. In that span, there's a giant chunk. It's going to easily fit the memory. It's just going to put it right there. Now that'll cause an issue because you're not going to have a 3 megabyte allocation. So what you're going to do, or what the allocator is going to do, is it's going to split up that giant chunk into 2 pieces with this split block method. What it basically does is it just checks to make sure that the remaining amount of memory in that chunk is worth an allocation. It's big enough to fit another allocation, and it'll just make it a new chunk, give it a header with its metadata. For the rest of the allocator, once you're far along enough, you have multiple spans in each arena. A normal run through with an allocation, it'll pick a random arena. It will look for a random span, and then once it picks that span, it'll do a linear search looking for the first chunk that it can fit. If there's nothing that can fit inside that chunk or that span, it'll look for another span. It'll do that up to 5 times, and if it can't find any of the spans to fit that allocation, it'll make a new span. So what this does is it could lead to a kind of, topology of one arena having 500 spans, another arena having 2, and then another arena having 25. And then in these spans, what we do when we are allocating memory is, so as we allocate more memory, these chunks inside these spans will get smaller and smaller. And when we free them, we are not coalescing, because the point of this allocator is that these chunks, these sizes, we don't know what these sizes are going to be. Okay, so you could end up with a chunk that looks like this. All right, let's say we free the chunk on the right. it stays there. So the next time the allocator tries to allocate something, let's say it gets the span, it looks through it, the first chunk, it's already allocated, can't go in that one. That second one, it might be able to fit the allocation. If the allocation is small enough to fit in that chunk, we can just put it in that chunk, and then we just run the split block to see if we can maybe get a third chunk in this span. All right, and then theoretically, this allocator could have a time complexity of O of 1. In theory, if every single time it grabs a random arena and span, it instantly finds a chunk that can fit that memory, which is pretty cool. In reality, that's not going to happen, but it could theoretically be better than GMs, but most likely not. The way we just search through these spans, it's not a linked list, it's not an array list, it's just a, it just in the metadata, you have the size, and if it's free, it'll just check, is this chunk already having memory allocated to it? If it is, it'll just move forward by the amount of, by the size of the memory, and then it'll just get to the next header and check that one. So it's just a simple linear search. So it does take a good amount of time, but worst case scenario, it'll only be checking 5 spans until it makes a new one. And that's that one. And then these are our sources. All right. That's it. All right, thank you. Yeah, any questions?
You. My podcast. Excuse me.
One presentation. Anyone can do one presentation, get a RITSEC lanyard.
Whoop whoop. Aiden, is Max here? Don't know. Looks like Shrion's gonna be up.
Let's go.
Is this me?
We're figuring that out. Just hold up 1 second. If he doesn't pick up and say he's on his way, then Shrion's just gonna go.
I guess we'll go next.
Is this thing
It doesn't have to be if you don't want it to be.
I mean, I don't want to jump.
You said some parts of the other.
But you don't want it.
Recording, that's easy. I just stop the recording, start it again, or just clip it out of the recording. Streaming a little bit more difficult, but I think I was watching the stream right now, so I don't mind just turning it on. I'm cool with you? Yep. Sweet.
Oh, is he not? Where is he? I called him and went to voicemail.
Then he is out of luck. Unfortunately.
I mean, yours is only on like 23. I mean, it's no rush, but there's still. We end at 4, so like he knows that after. Okay, the show must go on.
Your network has been compromised.
How do you do it yourself?
Alright, I'm gonna stop streaming right now. If I need to, I'll just turn it back.
He's gonna show up in like 5 minutes.
Whatever, bro. If you can wait, man.